Welcome to Genuine Life Recovery. We're here to help you and your loved ones overcome addictions and other addiction-related mental health challenges. In this show, we dive into the physical, emotional, psychological, and spiritual aspects of addiction, mental health, recovery, family dynamics, codependency, and more. You can listen on your favorite app or at jodystevens.org. Genuine Life Recovery is made possible by great friends like Joshua's Heart in memory of Joshua Brent Moore, bringing hope, love, and awareness to those afflicted by addiction, online at joshsheart.org, and Jody Stevens Productions for commercial voiceover, narration, production, MC, and public speaking, online at jodystevens.org. Hey friends, welcome back to Genuine Life Recovery. I'm very excited to talk with Barbara Grant. Barbara is a neurodiverse couples coach. She's an autism specialist. She's got a marriage and family therapy master's. Master's in marriage and family therapy is the correct way to say that. I said that in a dyslexic way, Barbara. This is perfect.
Wow.
I mean, this is perfect. Barbara's been featured in some national podcasts, publications, and she's also the editor and contributing author of a book about navigating Christian neurodiverse marriage. Oh, good. If you're watching this, she's holding that book up, Uniquely Us. And Barbara's been coaching since 2005, working with individuals, couples, groups, nonprofits, and Barbara's also been in 2 neurodiverse marriages and is the parent of an adult neurodivergent person. So if you haven't figured it out, we're going to be talking about neurodiversity and what neurodiversity is. And I'm excited, Barbara, because I'm considered neurodiverse or neurodivergent, however you say it, but I did not know that until I got your email, because I'm dyslexic, and that's just always been, she's dyslexic or has this learning disability, and that's really all I know. So we're going to talk about what that is, how it relates to mental health, how it relates to addiction.
Yeah.
Who is neurodiverse, like what sort of mental health, like ADHD and things like that, as far as what is neurodiversity. And then also, I like to hit on the benefits and the gifts, because every challenge or every weakness is a strength. So so Barbara, what I would like to do is I want to hear your story of your family and how you got into this. But first, what I'd like to do is explain what neurodiversity is for our listeners, and maybe talk a little about dyslexia, at which point I'll probably interject because I am dyslexic. And then once we kind of know what that is, then I'd love to just hear about your family situation and having a neurodiversity divergency in your family. So take it away.
Okay. So I'm loving, by the way, that you're clear about the term. So a person can be neurodivergent. Okay. But the fact that there are many neuroprofiles in the world means neurodiversity, right?
Okay.
So, and if in a partnership, for instance, or in a family where there are some neurodivergent individuals and some what we would call neurotypical or not neurodivergent, that is a neurodiverse family. There's a diversity of neuroprofiles.
Okay. Now, and I've heard of the neurotypical, they always talk about that in articles on, particularly like on narcissism, the big thing now, like I'm a neurotypical. And so I always thought I was a neurotypical, but maybe not. Anyway, continue.
And everything honestly is so relative, Jody. So I first of all want to say that the whole idea of neurodiversity is nascent, meaning emerging. It's new. We've always known, not always, we've had understanding of things like autism for a long time. ADHD is more recent, and even 13 years ago, it was separated into ADD, ADHD, meaning attention deficit disorder, attention hyperactive deficit disorder.
Right.
Autism used to be also high functioning, used to be called Asperger's. Okay. Dyslexia has become more known because children in school are being more observed in public school systems
Mm.
and even homeschooling by their parents who are looking at why can't Johnny read? You know, what's the problem? He's so
Yeah,
intelligent,
yeah,
right? And so many of the current DSM-5, which is the Diagnostic Statistical Manual that the is used to kind of categorize all these
yes,
diagnoses,
yeah.
which honestly is out of date. It was out of date 13 years ago when it was,
Right, I mean,
when
yeah.
it came out, and it does not
They
describe.
finally put gambling in there, which was nice, but yeah, I know
Yeah,
it's an
it's
interesting read.
well, and it's
That's for sure.
evolutionary. Okay, it's
It
by
is.
committee, by vote, by
Yeah,
people who think they know something,
right,
and
right.
so the diagnostic descriptive criteria is not good for adults in many cases. All
Yeah,
right,
yeah.
it's better for children and little boys in particular, but so the disorders, and I even don't like that name, disorders. There's
Right.
differences. Not
Yeah,
They're developmental, possibly delays, meaning
yeah,
development can happen. It doesn't happen at the statistical norm. All right. It's not abnormal. It's just
right.
out of sync with what most people experience. So
Yeah,
um
yeah, mhm, that's a
yeah,
good way to put
different.
it.
Yes,
Different, I like
different.
different because, as someone who's dyslexic, I would score off the chart brilliant in certain areas, those dumb tests they did in the '70s, the Iowa test or whatever, and then I would score absolutely, like, retarded on some, and there seemed to be no in between, it was very, very strange.
Yeah.
And they didn't understand. So I was in all this language stuff. Well, I'm a writer and a reader, so they didn't understand the mathematical dyslexia. It was only considered reading. So I failed math miserably, but I was in high reading because I went to all
Yeah.
these schools where we trace things in the air. And
Yeah.
so they tried.
Yeah. Well,
They
and again,
tried.
the problem with all of this, so let me first say things like autism, all right,
Yeah.
ADHD, OCD, meaning obsessive compulsive
Hmm.
disorder, dyslexia, Tourette's syndrome, any kind of neurological related, general neurological developmental delay is in the neurological category. And
Wow.
that is all considered neurological diverse, meaning different than the norm. Okay. So that's a broad name. And it's important to also know that in my experience, and most of the experience of all the colleagues I'm talking to, we don't see these things traveling alone. They're
Yeah.
described in silos, but the truth is, for instance, that between 25 and 60% of people that have ADHD, I mean, almost always have some kind of learning disability of some
Mm,
sort.
yeah.
Okay. And dyslexia comes in different flavors as you are describing.
Yeah.
So does autism. I mean, and autism is highly what they use the word co-current or comorbid with
Co-occurring,
ADHD.
right, and
Yeah,
that's what's so
with ADHD.
yeah, and that's what's so funny about the DSM is that they don't,
Yeah.
they say that each thing is individualized when
Yes.
really, and I think that's the biggest problem with it because like you said, most things are co-occurring. So
Yeah.
if depression's almost always co-occurring with addiction, then wouldn't depression and addiction be a whole separate thing together? Like, do you know what I mean?
Right.
And so
Right.
anyway, I tend to jump in a lot, but I hope I don't mess
No,
up your
I
train
love
of
it.
thought.
I love it.
But
Jump,
at
jump,
any
jump,
rate,
jump.
yeah.
Okay. So the important thing that I've learned is that, and from life experience, and I'll tell you about that, is that symptoms, what the symptoms are sometimes totally misread and not always traced to the real cause. Okay. And we're going to get
Yeah.
into that as we talk
Yeah.
about addiction, as we talk about depression and anxiety. Many people are missed. The testing for all of this is also very primitive. It's in silos. Okay.
Yeah.
You have people who are testing you for dyslexia. Are they looking for ADHD or autism? Probably not. You have people testing for autism. Are they looking for ADHD or OCD? Probably not. And I see all of neurodiversity not as a line or a silo. I see it as an XYZ axis, a three-dimensional presentation of traits, a constellation of traits that each neurodiverse person or neurodivergent person is unique, like a snowflake.
Yeah.
Okay, they're all snowflakes. They're all unique. And there's a saying, if you've met one neurodiverse person, you've met one neurodiverse person.
I love that.
Right. Like really. So generalities are helpful, but not don't deal with individual strengths and weaknesses, individual learning aptitude or delay in learning. And testing is almost always missing
Yeah.
a lot of stuff. And it's also neurodivergent people often are not good at self-reporting. They're just not able to see how they're presenting sometimes. So if you ask a neurodivergent person, and this happens when I give an assessment to the husband and the wife, and the husband's going, "No, I don't do that. No, 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 no. You see, I'm not autistic." And the wife is like, "He
Yeah,
sure
you
does
do.
that." Like he does that all the time.
Right,
So
right.
and yeah, so there's a lot going on about beginning to get out of the silos and into the holistic, big overview approach. And dyslexia in particular is most often spotted in children, but there
Mhm.
are a lot of adults who've never been tested.
I know. Yeah. Mhm. Mhm.
And, you found out about it obviously as a kid, and you went through probably some of the great learning structured programs for reading. Like you say, you're tracing things in the
Yes,
air.
yeah, it's I went to what do they call it? I went to this school in Anchorage. I grew up in Alaska to make things even
Oh,
worse.
wow.
Not worse.
Wow. Out
Good
there.
good and bad. But yeah, they always, she crosses her T's and things wrong. And so I went to a special school for dyslexia and oh my gosh, it's on the tip of my tongue. I forget what they call the curriculum. It'll come up like right in the middle of
Well,
what
there's
we're
like
talking
the
about.
international, yeah, there's different, yes, there's different, like there's the Orton Gilliam, there's the Wilson, the Lindemood Bell method. There's many different methods. I don't know if any of that was
No,
what
it
you
wasn't
did.
any of those,
Okay.
but I'll think of it. But yeah, you're tracing letters in the air, and saying them out loud, and it was helpful because I kind of realized I'm starting to realize how I learn at 52 years of age. Finally, but I got this book called The Gift of Dyslexia at the library of all things, and it struck me, and they were explaining how we think in pictures, and
Yeah.
they were explaining how, like, if you, and I'll try to do this quick because I want to hear your
Yeah.
story. If you're a kid and you're reading a book and it's like the dog jumped over the fence, right? The kid starts and he says well, he doesn't have a visual picture for so now he's a little bit stumped up, but he goes on and then he goes dog, and then he can think of his dog. Jumped, okay, I get it. Over, I kind of get it. Then he hears the word doesn't have a picture for so he has to go all the way back, starting
Mhm.
again in his mind to say
Yes.
the dog jumped over, and it hit me. I was like, that's what's happening. And so if I get something that's just visual, it's can be difficult if it's just audio or words, but if it's visual and words, then I'm like, oh, I
Yeah.
get this. So
Yeah.
it's so interesting how we think.
Yeah. It
Slingerland, that's
is.
what it was. Slingerland,
Yeah.
whatever that is.
Yes. That's
Anyway,
another one. Yeah. Great. Well,
so
go ahead.
oh, that's all I was going to say. I finally remembered it. But it's just so interesting to understand why. And even as I've been a DJ for 30 years, but this thing about losing my train of thought in the middle of being on the air, it's happened a few times. And then with it came an anxiety disorder and then addiction because, teachers told my mom she's stupid, she'll never amount to anything.
Mhm.
And then there was stuff with them. So there was anxiety. So the
Yeah.
blanking out, I
Yeah.
think, was less of addiction and more of a block of anxiety where I would
Yes.
blank
Yeah.
out. And like one time I wrecked her car because I froze on the accelerator. And I realized later in
Yeah.
life that I think that was anxiety. But then you had this dyslexia. And so what ended up happening was I became obsessed with being perfect and this over preparedness because I
Mhm.
was so afraid if I messed up, or went blank, that everyone would know I
Mhm.
was stupid,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
so whereas some girls maybe go promiscuous or do these things, for me, it was always like, I got to be smart. I got to be one of the guys. I got to be super smart so I can overprove this whole, like now I have 2 master's degrees. It's like, how
Yeah.
can I over
Yeah.
prove that I'm smart? And,
Yeah.
Einstein was dyslexic, but I still go blank. I still don't remember anything like my past. We'll be driving around and my husband will be like, don't you remember when we were there? And I'm like, no, I don't know what that is all about, not remembering anything. But
Yeah, I mean the
anyway,
brain gifting. Yeah. So what you're describing, I'm so glad you're sharing this. First of all, thank you so much for
I don't
your
think I've
audience
ever
to
shared this with
understand neuro.
anyone. Yeah.
Oh my gosh,
In this
Jody, what a
detail,
privilege.
because we're always
Yeah. No,
talking
but
about
this.
recovery. So this is fun. I was so
Yeah.
looking forward to this.
Well, and what you're sharing, Holly, is so relatable. Okay, because many people with neurodivergent or neurodiverse people um, are anxious. Okay, they're very sensitive, they're anxious. They grow up with a sense of being slightly out of phase with other people and
Yeah.
situations and reality as others are reading it or experiencing it or communicating about it. And there is a masking, there is an anxiety, there is a limbic system overfunction. Now, the limbic system in the brain is your survival brain.
Hmm.
This the fight, flight, freeze, or fawn
Oh, yeah.
hippocampus, amygdala, like red alert, right?
Yep.
Very valuable brain. Definitely want it if a woolly mammoth has to be killed or a
Right.
saber-tooth tiger is chasing you, get out of there. But it overfunctions and it basically takes over. It's a highly emotional brain. It's an irrational brain because it doesn't involve the prefrontal cortex, which is our reasoning functioning. So a
Oh,
lot of people go into fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. It sounds like you went into freeze
yes.
when you had your foot on that pedal and you wrecked your mom's car.
Hmm.
Very understandable. Anxiety and depression come from that brain. And because unless you learn to identify the pattern of irrational and hyper dysregulated feeling, thinking, and behavior,
Hmm.
and begin to involve your prefrontal cortex. This is cognitive behavioral therapy,
Yeah. Yeah.
dialectical behavioral therapy, meditation, breathing exercises, even something as
Done
simple as
all of it. Yeah.
yeah, this is called butterfly hug. You put your thumbs together
Hmm.
facing your chest and you tap on your chest. You just tap, tap, tap. You say things like, "I'm anxious, but I think I'll calm down. I am not
Ooh.
going to fail in this moment."
Is this
And
like
you
a
tap.
EMDR kind of a thing where you're
Yes, it's exactly that. Because
oh,
you're sending signals to both sides of the brain. If you verbalize it, it becomes an automatic disruption to the limbic system overdrive. You're now involving the language center of your brain. You're training yourself to think differently. You're actually giving yourself a physical stimulation to your other nervous system receptors, and you are disrupting the fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, and you're
wow.
talking your way, and you're comforting, and you're self-regulating. All
So
right,
if
you're
you're listening to
self-regulating.
this, like if you're hearing it, go on YouTube, Genuine Life Recovery, because I'm doing it. Am I doing it right?
Yes, you're doing
Oh
it
my
right.
gosh. This
And
is so
and
great because my friend Ann and I were like,
mhm,
how can we do EMDR without like paying for it? And
yeah,
she's like, well, I got these
yeah.
balls and so I'm going to show her this.
Oh my gosh.
I love it.
Well, if anybody wants to Google butterfly hug, or
Okay.
another one is tapping, because similarly you tap on the back of your head, you tap on your head, you tap on your temples, under your eyes, here, here, and here, and you're saying things as you do this. And it's these are pressure points that in acupressure,
Uh-huh.
energy flow points work the same way. So there are some so these are called somatic exercises. There's
Yeah.
also things like box breathing, where I mean, Navy SEALs, EMTs, firefighters, they all learn box breathing. Box breathing is a simple four count So you imagine a square, you're visual, so you
I
could
do
do
this
this.
at night. It's funny because I'm always looking at the military because I have wicked insomnia. So I'm like, 1, 2, 3, 4, hold 2,
Yeah.
3, 4, down 2,
Four,
3, 4,
two,
down
three,
2.
four, hold, two,
Sometimes it
three, four.
sometimes it doesn't work. And then I tighten all the muscles and let them loose. And
Well, you
uh,
know a lot of these things.
well,
That's great.
yeah,
So,
I've like I would go 3, 4 days with zero sleep. I mean, literally.
yeah.
But I
Oh,
still have wicked anxiety. So even some of the military techniques
yeah.
don't work. They've helped.
Well,
They've
the
definitely
butterfly hug
helped.
is going to help. The butterfly
Okay.
hug is going to help because it's a little different. You can also do it if you don't want to do, you can put your hands on your thighs and do it under the table or on
Ooh.
your arms and do it. And
Uh-huh.
it's that idea of right side, left side,
Yes.
consciously calming yourself down and even going drinking water. There's other things you can do, but I don't want to get too much into discussing anxiety
I
alone
know
because
it's
we're,
like
we're here to talk about a lot of things.
it's turning into a therapy session with Barbara. But so tell me kind of how you got into all of this. I'd love to hear about your experiences.
Yeah.
You were in two
Neurodivergent, yeah, first
neurodivergent
marriages.
marriages.
Yes, yes. So, my first husband, was, is autistic and ADHD.
Wow,
Um,
okay.
Now, while we were married, the first marriage was 20 years. By the way, we're best friends. He and his new wife and I, we're prayer partners regularly. We're like family. We get together for
Nice.
holidays. We're just like as close as you can be, considering, we were divorced, but we were
Yeah.
married. We're very involved with our soon-to-be born granddaughter and our kids. Anyway, so we did not know during the marriage that this was something he was struggling with. And
Wow.
he was so good at masking. He was so high functioning in,
Yeah.
some amazing ways. He had such gifting. But at the end of the 20 years, he was burned out. I was burned out. And it was sort of a mutual parting of the ways. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm sad that we didn't have, this was back in 2004 or five. I'm so sad that we didn't have what people have now, where you can actually read about this stuff or learn about it or
Yeah.
leverage some understanding, which is a lot of what I do for my clients. He, we didn't know at the time that my son was also neurodivergent. I got remarried.
Mm-hmm.
I married a guy I thought was totally different, but he was a money guy. He was very into spreadsheets and very ordered thinking and patterns. And he
Sounds like my
made,
husband. Sometimes I think
well,
he's on the spectrum, but he doesn't
Well,
look so.
yeah. So guess what? There might be something there. So, I didn't know until like 2 years into my new marriage. My son, who's now 34, and he's a nurse, and in many ways he's very successful, but he's had a up and down time of it.
Yeah.
He was deer in the headlights, kind of demotivated, procrastinating, not able to get himself into the college mode coming out of high school, which was like he was straight A. Like, what up? What's that
Yeah.
about?
Yeah.
So I finally had him diagnosed high functioning autism. It was an
Mm.
excellent review because the doctor, she was a clinical psychologist. She had 6 people do surveys to speak into how he was presenting, as well as testing him. So
Wow.
turns out he's an incredible genius level IQ,
Yeah.
which, you know, but he was autistic, high functioning back then. They called it Asperger's. But we didn't get any help for that. Like, how does that impact relationships? What is he experiencing?
Right. Yeah.
And
Thanks. But
and
no
just like I
thanks.
said, yeah, just like I said, they tested him in a silo. If she assessed him for 88, because back then it was ADD or ADHD, that never came out. And it was too bad because he needed medication. And finally, when he was a nurse, 8 hours into his 12-hour night shift, and he was like not tracking as well as he'd like to, his doctor said, you have autism. Maybe try some Ritalin, see if that helps. And oh my gosh, he finally had gas in his tank. He had been powering through with his masterful intelligence and not just able to do and think and be in many ways present and relaxed. So the medication
Mm.
helped
Wow.
enormously. And now he's on
Wow.
that regularly. So ADHD meds, um, are not the only intervention, but they can be very significant if
Yeah.
people are needing that. Okay, so
Yeah.
I now knew, oh my goodness, my son's neurodivergent. My first husband, his father, it's 81% genetic. There it is. And
Right.
it was only when my second husband retired and now we were face to face that I began to really see the relational deficits, the communication deficits, the
Yeah.
odd behaviors, and certain things that he was choosing to do financially that I began to question. And he was, there's something about ADHD. Well, he didn't have ADHD, I don't think, but autistic ADHD, even neurodivergent people, they can have what's called rejection sensitivity dysphoria. It's a big word, but RSD, they are viscerally pained to feel that maybe there's something wrong with them. They are anxious about it. They are terrified of being rejected. And they have this huge sensitivity to the idea of being rejected. And it's
Mm.
debilitating. If you don't know about it and begin to work with it, it can be debilitating. And it proved he didn't want to work with any of his neurodivergents.
Wow.
And it was so sad, but some of the behaviors that came out of it, in my experience, were
Mm-hmm.
not acceptable. And I chose over time to say, okay, I'm going to get my master's in marriage and family therapy. I'm already a biblical counselor. I'm going to work on becoming a better counselor. And in trying to get help for our relationship, I met Dr. Stephanie Holmes, who is the actual author of the book with her husband, Dan, and we all co-wrote it with her. I was the editor on the book. She's a thought leader based out of Atlanta
Mm-hmm.
for the Christian community, especially.
Nice.
She was the one who said to me, you know, Barbara, your husband's not tracking with this, but you get it. And now I was realizing my mother's father, my grandfather, he was autistic. My uncle,
Wow.
an engineer, autistic. His daughter, my first cousin, an economist, she's autistic. Her son was autistic. So I began to realize that in my family of origin, we have what's called the broad autism phenotype. That is a influence of genetic and cultural behaviors around autism. Now, there
Mm.
was a lot else going on with my parents. They were both survivors of World War II in Europe, and my mom had PTSD.
Yeah.
But
Mm-hmm.
I had autism in my blood, in my culture, in my family of origin. So it
Wow.
seemed familiar when I met and married my first husband. And then again, familiar when I met and married my second husband. I wasn't getting red lights like there's a problem here because it would seem normal to me. It was what I was used to. Does that help
Wow.
you understand my story?
Yeah, well, and remember that movie in the 70s with what was his name? Dennis something or other. He also played in Kramer versus Kramer. It was about the child that
Oh,
had
Dustin Hoffman. This, yeah,
Dustin
Rain Man.
Hoffman.
Yeah.
This
Yeah,
wasn't
everybody
Ray.
references this movie.
No,
It,
this was way before
oh,
Rain Man, where the little
oh,
boy
really?
had autism and then they got him help and he began to talk and act normal. And then at the end,
Oh,
he reverted back and then it was over. It was like super depressing. It was in the
oh,
70s. I'm not sure.
oh my
I
God.
just thought of
Is
it
that,
though.
is that Flowers for Algernon? Or, I mean, I don't know. Yeah,
Something
there's,
like that. Yeah, I remember
yeah,
it was really good. I remember I really liked it as a kid and, now I know why.
yeah,
So this is fascinating. So autism, wow. And so the testing was very specialized and I've noticed this too, where, it tends to be so for instance, I worked for an opiate treatment center for a while and did some intakes and things like that. And they do, the biopsychosocial and all those things where it's looking at risk factors. And one of those is psychological. But you
mhm,
are correct in that there's, they might ask about ADHD or something. No one in the world would ever ask about dyslexia, like ever.
right.
But there really isn't any connection to the neurodiverse type of stuff as it
Right.
relates to addiction. It's not factored in. So it doesn't seem like
Yeah.
the testing is either available or not catching it.
Well, I have to say, there is a gigantic connection
Right.
between undiagnosed neurodivergence and addiction.
Mm.
And so studies show that, and these studies are going back several years and to current, as high as 62% of addicts of substance abuse disorders, meaning alcohol
Yep.
or drugs, are also ADHD. Okay. Now, they could easily be dyslexic and or autistic. All right. But high co-occurrence. And
Yeah.
now there's the reason that the numbers are so skewed is because there are many neurodivergent people that don't know they're neurodivergent. They know they're alcoholics. They know they're drug addicts.
Right. See, and I've been
All right.
sober. I'm an alcoholic. My husband's an alcoholic. My grandfather was so you have autism, we have alcoholism,
Yeah.
anxiety, and then some other
But
mental
there could
health
be some
stuff.
ADHD in there, because
Maybe.
just,
I just,
yeah,
yeah.
ADHD is a very prevalent. So the CDC, the Center for Disease Control, last published 2020 published uh, prevalence rates. 1 in 9 kids in 1 in 9 kids are diagnosed or diagnosable as ADHD. That's just the ones they're finding. So
Wow.
there are a lot of traumatized kids, and there's a big similarity between a traumatized brain and a neurodivergent brain, because neurodivergence is a traumatizing experience in this culture.
Yeah.
A friend just told me she's ADHD, and she's all fired up because Walmart now has high sensitivity shopping hours across the
Right. I
country
read
and
that.
in Puerto Rico. Right. Where you can go between 8 and 10 and they're not throwing lights at you and sound, and it's dim, and
Serious. I know. I'm like, do we always have to meet at Starbucks? I can't stand it. It
I
drives me nuts. Like
know.
I need to be soothed. Anyway,
I know,
continue on.
exactly. So there's this sensitivity, growing
Yeah.
awareness of how big a deal this is,
Yeah.
especially if you have kids who are going to flip out in the shopping cart because of
Wow.
attention, blue light special, attention
Right,
shopping.
right.
Oh my
Yeah.
gosh. So I just think that there is growing awareness of there is already an understanding that trauma can lead to alcoholism or drug
Correct.
addiction,
Mhm.
but it's the dysfunction in the brain and neurology. It isn't like
Yeah.
you're allergic to alcohol and you just can't tolerate it. There is a brain function that leads you, because of lack of impulse control, depression and anxiety, that you're trying to self-medicate, and there's something called alexithymia. Alexithymia is a sort of a lack of awareness of your feelings. Sometimes you may feel bad, but you're not okay. So and you're not able to associate bad outcomes with bad feel. You're kind of stepping back from
Yeah.
assessing consequences, and you're hyper focused on the impulse, satisfying the dopamine drive. You're low in dopamine. You want to get that dopamine hit. So you do something, whether it's porn or you're overeating, you're binging on chocolate, Haagen-Dazs, or you're shopping too much, or you're drinking too much, or smoking too much, or whatever.
Yeah.
It's all about satisfying the dopamine hit that you're desiring,
Yeah.
because you're not naturally in that place
Yeah.
of getting the dopamine hit.
Well, and I always tell people, you're trying to fix what's broken. When I
Yeah.
would drink when I was young, it took everything away. It took the anxiety away. It took the fear away.
Yeah.
I have real low serotonin, so I take a little bit of
Mhm.
Lexapro, completely changed my
Right.
life. Then I quit
Right.
taking because we're not supposed to take. And then I began taking it
Mhm.
again because it
Yeah,
was just so helpful. But
it is.
this is so interesting that we're talking about this because
Yeah.
for some kids growing up, they have it all. So they're neurodivergent. There's trauma, as there was some in my case. There's genetics there, and so
Mhm.
when we try to, and I think that mental health is getting better at this, right? With their
Yeah.
biopsychosocials and things like that, where we're really starting to individualize and look at all those things because
Mhm.
there's no one cause. And we know that,
Yeah.
like, we know how complicated people are.
Yeah.
And then why we then go and try to like isolate everything is so funny to me. And maybe that's one of the gifts of being dyslexic is I can totally see how, yeah, it's science. And I say this every show. Like, yes, it's it's our brain. Yes, it's our genetics. Yes, it's the environment. Like it's all of those. And for like with your, I don't know if you have addiction in your family, but you could say that the biggest risk factor would be the autism, whereas someone else's biggest risk factor would be PTSD, or you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I just think that that's so important because there's just so many causes,
Well,
and to try
this
to pinpoint one, like, and I like how you think you have to, they're all there and you just
they're
kind
all there. And
of
so I have an advantage. I'll just be honest. I have a tremendous advantage.
yeah,
I went to school already having life experience about how neurodiversity manifests. So
yeah,
when my son was 12, okay, he went from elementary school. We started him a year late in school. Already in preschool, his teachers were going, if you can give him another year, we think that would help him. And I wasn't in a rush. He was my firstborn. My daughter, I wasn't in a big rush to get him into school. So we started him a year late. By the time he was 12, he was going from his sixth grade elementary school into middle school. And he gets to middle school and he's crying every morning. He's getting D's. He's like not a happy camper. The transition traumatized him from one culture and routine and system to a next. He was like not a happy camper. And I took him to the pediatrician who said, let's get him tested by a child psychologist. She talked to him. She figures, oh, he's depressed, and sends him to a psychiatrist who gives him Zoloft for depression, my
hmm,
12-year-old. Nobody asked, could he be ADHD, or nobody even asked those questions.
right,
And and his band teacher, God bless her, said, I think your son's okay. I think he just needs to adjust and let him. I'll work with him in band and he'll have fun and all. Well, sure enough, in 3 months he was okay. He had figured it out. He was tracking with the
wow,
new system. We took him off the Zoloft, and that was the end of that. And I think that was weird. Like, what was that about? But
yeah,
so um, a gift of neurodiversity is hyper focus. Okay, but a deficit is a lack of what I would call central coherence, meaning they see the trees, but they're not seeing the forest.
yeah,
And I'm a forest. I can look at trees, I can and see the forest. I'm very unique. I can hyper focus and I can see global. So I come to school. Now I got my master's within the last 5 years, right? You would think in California, an accredited school on track for the California licensing exam for therapy would be current. Well, no, it's not, because the state
nothing surprises
licensing.
me about
Okay,
California.
but again, well, not just, oh, no, no, this California's way ahead of the curve compared to some other states.
I
Okay,
suppose.
because the state licensing exams across clinical disciplines were all written 20 years ago by bureaucratic boards who had to pass through state legislative, approvals by committee. And just like the DSM-5 is woefully out of date, these state board licensing exams don't talk about cutting edge current anything.
Yeah,
So the
yeah,
schools are teaching and training people to pass the state board licensing exams, and unless you're in an internship or you come out and you work for somebody in the field who's current, or you make it your business to stay and get current, like, okay, well, what about the last 20 years? What's going on now? You have to self-educate. You should be reading things and learning about things. But a lot of, life happens, and, oh, I've got my practice. I'm getting my clients, my insurance, this being covered. I don't have to, yeah, I have to do some continuing ed units but unless you have a life experience that helps you understand how critical neurodiversity is
yeah,
to so much of what's going on with your marriage clients, your children, your teens, you know, so many of the behaviors can be looked at through a neurological lens, and you're like, okay, that's cutting, anxiety, things that bulimia or
hmm,
anorexia in
yeah,
girls. This is classic high functioning autism ADHD behavior.
wow,
All right. So unless people lean into that and begin to go to conferences and have more speakers, but one of the things you were asking about, and when you talked to me about what we could talk about, is like the church. And I just looked at the upcoming October American Association of Christian Counselors, their giant convention,
Mm-hmm.
and only one slate is even somewhat talking about neuroscience, and only one presentation mentions ADHD. And they
Wow.
consider themselves a mental health Christian organization. They are
Wow.
nowhere discussing the reality of what is going on. Their addiction track doesn't mention neurodiversity. Their marriage track doesn't mention neurodiversity because the speakers don't know. They haven't been trained.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well,
Which
and
is
I think
which is why we wrote the book, to get everybody to pay attention.
right. Well, and it's interesting that you bring that up because I'm actually writing a book as well on it's more about like integration, like figuring out who I am. But I'm trying to, I'm wanting to incorporate the psychology and the science. And then there's a fear there as a Christian that
Mhm.
it's going, because psychology can get a bad rap in the church, particularly the more conservative ones. And so, like, my goal is to integrate all this stuff. And I probably say this every show too. The Bible talks about the world, the flesh, the devil. So, all these things, if we look at sin, they're all corrupted, even our
Yes.
neurons. And so psychology and science, like all this stuff is valid. And I feel like it needs to be integrated in a way that's
Yeah.
safe and healthy and biblical and,
Yeah.
things like that. But,
Well, the Bible, let's just say, okay, the Bible is very much a neurological manual. If you look at scripture that says,
yeah,
take every thought captive and make it
right.
obedient to Christ, well, guess what? That's cognitive behavioral
It
therapy.
is.
Identifying a thought, taking it captive,
Yep.
thinking a better thought, doing a better thing. Colossians is full of take this off, put this on, take
Yeah.
off the bad behavior, put on the good behavior. That is all about getting self-regulated,
Yep.
the fruit of the
Yep.
spirit, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, self-control. Paul even says in Philippians 4 that we should think of whatever is pure, lovely, admirable, noble, excellent, true, righteous, praiseworthy. Think of the good things. Train your mind towards the positive. Take the negative, calm down, identify the fear, the anxiety, identify the fight, flight, freeze, fawn.
Yeah.
Understand that's not going to help you relationally,
Right.
spiritually, physically, emotionally, any way, and get your frontal lobe and relational circuitry involved to bring calmness. So the butterfly hug, I call it angel wings. I tell
Oh, I
my
love it.
clients
I
it's
love it.
angel
I love
wings,
that.
right?
Yeah.
Because I think I want to, and there are people like in our book, we talk about Dr. Jim Wilder, who's a neurotheologian. And he
Hmm.
has spearheaded a lot. He talks about being in enemy mode. He has a book called Escaping Enemy Mode,
Uh-huh.
where, it's all about being in fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, and how to transcend that, and
Yeah.
the need to identify that this is neurological. And
Yeah.
he's a neuroscientist. So there are a lot of people that are talking about that more. And, the point is when you look at the Bible and like it says in Romans, don't conform to the patterns of the
Right.
world, the craziness and the habits and the fear, but renew our minds.
Right.
It
Hmm.
starts with how we think.
Well, and that's fascinating too, because then once we do all of that, then this concept of neuroplasticity happens, and
Yeah.
that's what's so beautiful about it. And, I stumbled on all of this by myself because I had a massive panic attack in college. Of course, the marijuana didn't help, but
Mm,
I and it just went
yeah.
on, and I couldn't breathe, and I was going to call 911 because I thought I was dying, and then
Yeah.
I got the phone in my hand, the pay phone back then, and I'm like, I can't be dying. I'm only 21. But the point of it is that I grabbed the guitar and I started strumming, and I realized that something was
Mm,
going on neurologically, and that if I could think something else, and that's kind of where all that cognitive stuff
yeah.
started, and then I just started to become aware, like,
Yeah.
what are you thinking? What are you feeling?
Yeah.
Why are you triggered? Is this individual an
Hmm.
authority figure, or do they put their pants on just like you? And but it
Hmm.
it, it took a lot of and that's where God came in, because he will show us
Hmm.
the truth from the error, because so often when there's trauma and neurodivergency and all those things, we get triggered very easily back to a different time, hence that sensitivity that you were talking about. And that would happen to me all the time. And I never understood why I was so embarrassed and shamed and triggered and freaked out all the time. So I would just go get drunk. But
Yeah.
once I slowed down and figured it all out, I was like, okay, I kind of see what's happening and I kind of see why. And for me, once I understood why, I could fix that. Not everybody needs to know why, but
Well, yeah.
and so
Well, and I love what you're saying, Judy, because you're identifying the fact that, a lot of teaching historically has been, well, just repent, just pull up yourself by your bootstraps, just get over it already.
right.
And people are like, well, how do I do that? Like, and so our
Yeah.
brains, I tell my clients, our brains are basically computers. Really, they are. And if they get programmed at young ages, we get a lot of programming and our brain is super efficient. It's going to automate things. If we think thoughts and have feelings and behaviors, our brain is going to lock that into a encoded neural program.
Right.
And there's a saying that what fires together wires together.
Right. It's that
Okay.
like being
So
wired for trauma and all those
yes,
things.
and those are your triggers. You've wired that.
Yep.
So we have hardwired. So what we have to do, and I tell my clients, a lot of them are IT guys, I say, look, are you still operating on Windows 1? And they look at me like, no. I'm like on Windows whatever, 29 or wherever it's at
Right.
now.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm a Mac user. I'm a Mac user.
I don't even use
So
those Windows
okay.
programs.
I'm like, okay, well, what happened? You got updates, you got upgrades,
Mm.
you got bug fixes, you got new programming. And I said, you are the architect of your programming. We can choose to identify our bad programming. And now we can consciously choose to introduce new programming. And
I
it's
love
just
that.
a
I love
matter of
that.
time.
Yeah.
It's a matter of time because if you disrupt a bad habit, a bad program, and you disrupt it often enough with a better habit and a better program, your brain is going to go, oh, this thing that we've automated that you do, this is not what we're doing anymore. Oh,
Yeah.
this is the new thing. Oh, okay. We're just dumping and deleting the old program, and now we have a new habit.
I love it. And that's
That's it.
neurodiversity is what Barbara's talking about. It's exactly that, just
Yeah,
really retraining your brain. And that's why a lot of
yeah,
times if you'll get a medication or something, they'll say, well, let's do this for a while and then we can wean off it because they're retraining those
right.
neurons and
Yeah,
neuroactivity to
and
actually change.
exactly.
And it does because, if you grew up wired for trauma and then you spend 10 years in the clouds, you're
Yeah,
going to be like cloudy or you know what I mean,
yeah,
like your brain
yeah, yeah.
actually will change for the better. And once we can understand that, we can realize, okay, it doesn't always have to be like this, and that
No.
is just so important. But
Well,
why are
what
we
I
so
also,
behind on this, Barbara? Like, I mean, we're sending people to the moon. Now we're doing
yeah.
like the Elon Musk people are sending people like you and I to space, but we haven't
Well,
figured
the
this
Elon
out
Musk
yet.
people, they're all neurodivergent. First of all, let me point
Right,
out that
right,
most
exactly.
technology, Elon Musk is probably on the
Oh,
spectrum. Okay,
totally, totally.
they're creating the world we're living in,
Yeah,
but these are the people that are in silos. Okay.
yeah.
And the word autism, by the way, comes from the Greek word autos, meaning self. Like an
Mm,
automobile is a self-moving car, right? So autism is self-referencing. And because of the this dysregulation, many neurodivergent people are very self-focused and they're very self-aware and they're hyper-focused. So they're not looking again at the forest, at the global picture. They're not even sometimes as relationally tuned in as they might be. So
yeah.
a
Mm,
lot of science and academics, the absent-minded professors, that
right.
were all probably autistic, they're all in silos and they study
Mm,
in silos. And in order to do academic research, you have to go super focused into a topic with very prescribed testing parameters where you're targeting and testing and measuring very specific things and they're not necessarily they're getting these studies, but until you do a meta study of well, let's see what all the studies are saying, you're not looking at the big picture.
right.
So there's again the schools aren't training it, The state board licensing exams don't address it. And people are just saying, well, I'm having a hard time just keeping up with people not killing themselves and draining the bank account. And
Right.
they're trying to do damage control, which is so important. Damage control is so important, but remedy is more difficult. And also you have generational problems. So as we talked about, my grandfather had autism. My mother was PTSD, borderline autistic. I came into a family where, there's probably autism in some level in me. My son, all right. And a lot of families are highly dysfunctional from trauma, alcoholism,
Yep.
abuse, dysregulation, anger, fits of anger. And so
All of it.
people just get, I'm just in survival mode. So
Yeah.
what I love about your sharing, thank you, that you were on Lexapro and that you were learning breathing exercises is it is so important for anybody that wants to grow to first calm down on
Right.
some level.
Yeah.
And I work with couples and I say, look, I don't do couples therapy. They tell you in school, oh, the couple is the client. I'm like, no, they're not. The marriage is only as good as the two individuals. So
Mm-hmm.
my track is I start with the neurotypical, separate from the neurodivergent. I work with each of them to get them in their own lane of calmness, clarity. As the Bible says, let's take the log out of our own eye first before we start trying to fix and tell the other what they need to change.
Yeah.
And I get them calming down, learning boundaries, learning how they do or don't help the problem, what they could do better. And when they're ready and calm, I call it space and grace. I tell people, don't be discussing things you're not equipped to talk about. You're just going to re-traumatize yourself,
Yeah.
right? And somatic body exercises, right? Okay. And then they get calm, and then we begin in a very safe and structured way to have very productive conversation. And as they learn, they have to stay calm. They're responsible for their calmness. The other person can trigger them, but they have to learn boundaries and not get triggered.
Mm-hmm.
And they can begin to change their behaviors, whether the other changes or not. Each of them can change and grow. And if even just one of them is beginning to make progress,
Yeah.
that helps the other begin to calm down and make progress.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I see works, and that's how we can one another each other in life is taking responsibility for you, being
Yep.
calm, learning about your neuroprofile, understanding your trauma, not being afraid to look, being curious,
Yeah.
because that's where growth comes,
Yeah.
is growth. And anyway, so yeah, and you're in that category. I love that about you, Jody. You're leading the way here, looking and curious and dealing with your own stuff and talking about it.
No, I love I mean, and I've studied psychology since I was a little kid, and then I got my MS in addiction counseling, and then also one in leadership. And it was a lot of psychology and attachment disorders and leading from the
Yeah.
inside out and all
Mhm.
these things. But neurodiversity, maybe a couple sections here and there. It,
Yeah.
it really wasn't
Yeah.
discussed. So as someone
Yeah.
as that was dyslexic, I never tied it. I tied it into my I tied the neurodiversity into the addiction as it related to the trauma of it, but never
Yeah.
the neurological until
Yeah.
now. Like I'm looking
Yeah.
at that going, okay, this is really interesting, you know.
This is huge, girl. I can't
You
wait
know,
for all the incredible ahas you're going to begin to
I
have.
know, I know.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if you have advice because, like you said, I mean, the world's crazy. We're terrorist attacks and opiate crisis. And,
Hmm. Hmm.
it's very difficult to get any kind of correct assessment and
Hmm.
even if if you're going in to get help, particularly for addiction, they're overcrowded. The counselors are 19 or whatever. Like it's very,
Hmm.
they don't have counselors on staff. They're not being
Hmm.
assessed correctly. Like, I mean, we would have people come in that had overdosed 3 times on fentanyl, and they were getting methadone, but they really
Hmm.
weren't, there wasn't enough counseling. And so we're I guess what I'm saying is it's very hard to
Yeah.
get the care that we need because there's just so many
Yeah.
challenges. And I don't mean to be Debbie Downer, but it's crazy
It
because
is
you've got
crazy, but you know
people
what?
working with people that have no experience
Oh my God.
dealing, these are people that need to be inpatient, not coming in
Yeah.
weekly for, and that was just the
Yeah.
one big thing that I saw. And they're wonderful. I mean, they give and they give, but it's
Mm-hmm.
the help's just not there. So
Yeah.
where do we start if we think, gosh, I think,
Well,
my kid, I might be neurodivergent, and my kid's
yeah.
struggling with,
Yeah. Yeah.
do I go to a psychologist or a psychiatrist or a therapist or a
Yeah.
neuroscientist?
So I think
Loaded
that
question.
I think the big answer I see is honestly the internet. The internet is beginning to be full of very amazing and good information. Now, there's people that just want your money and they'll
Yeah,
sell you a
yeah,
quick fix. But if people can begin to query and look for Google things like, what is ADHD? What ADHD and alcoholism? They are going to come up with incredible blogs. The Very Well Mind, Psychology Today, these
yeah.
general websites do have people thinking and publishing blogs and short articles that aren't technical and scientific that are going to start helping people understand. In fact, I'm redoing my SEO on my website, and I asked a bunch of the people that I've worked with over the last 5 years, what keywords did you search on when you were looking? And I
Mm-hmm.
got things like, you know, um, uh, husband won't relate emotionally, or
Mm.
poor communication, and I got some very descriptive words. Then I started getting. Then they said, well, then I guess maybe autism and maybe ADHD, and then they found the word neurodiversity, and so
Mm.
it was a progression of their own Googling that taught them what other options they may have to understand things. So I find that that's how I got educated
Yeah.
about all of this.
Yeah.
And
Mhm,
I
me
do
too.
think if people have access and are willing to do a little digging, because if you just go to your doctor or your nurse or your school counselor, you're going to get a very limited understanding maybe of what is really going on. And it
Yeah.
and I'm happy, by the way, to give anybody 20 minutes for free on my website. They can ask me any question. I will send them resources. I'll tell them where to go. There's online assessments people can do, free online assessments. Now, these again are maybe just about autism or dyslexia or ADHD, but they can take a number of them if they're curious. And
Mhm.
I tell people also, it's not so important to get a diagnosis unless you're a child or somebody that needs legal accommodations.
Yeah.
Okay, accommodations, the ADA, the American Disabilities Act, is law now that if you have a legal diagnosis, and my son had a diagnosis, so when he went to college and they put him in a packed him in a suite with, he'd have to share a room with two guys, and he's like, "Oh my God, Mom, I can't go to college." I'm like, "No, no, no, no. You go to housing, you tell them you have a diagnosis on file,
Yeah.
and you need a private room." And you know what? In 5 minutes, they gave it to him.
Yeah.
So,
Quick.
but he had a
Yeah.
diagnosis on file.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if you're an adult and you just think, what could this be something?
Yeah.
You don't need a diagnosis to begin to deal with it. Many
Right.
family physicians will also write a script for ADHD medication. All right. Or there are ways to get, um, a lot of somatic um, body workers, like I'm breathing exercises,
Mhm.
meditation,
Yeah.
exercise. So the top three things people need to do are exercise,
Yeah, that's
eating
huge.
well,
Mhm.
and sleep as best they can sleep. Those are
Yeah.
the three basic pillars of sanity and good neurology. Eating well, exercising, and good sleep.
Yeah.
And high levels of really good vitamin omega-3 will help every brain. Omega-3
Mm.
fish oils are really, really good stuff. So
Yeah.
those are things everybody can do. Aerobic exercise is better than just lifting weights. Walking is good. Doing walking with an occasional jog to get your heart rate up is better.
Mhm.
But
Yeah,
these are
that's
some basic
essential
things.
for
Yeah,
I have to work out to even I have to get that endorphin thing
yeah,
going. And I would also say, and this is such a buzzword right now, is that mindfulness. But it's really true,
yeah,
just
it is.
being self-aware. And that's the one thing
Yeah,
that when I first I got sober through AA, and there's a lot of things they don't
yeah,
do, but thing that was nice was really just spending some time with gratitude. And that's when I started to
Yeah.
understand gratitude,
Yeah.
mindfulness, just trying to figure out like what's going on. Because
Yeah.
if you can start to figure out what you're feeling and why,
Yes.
you can really figure a lot of things out about
Yeah.
your health and mental health and even the
Well, I,
the neurology stuff,
and again, I want to point out I love what you're saying about gratitude because, and again, Philippians 4 is an RX for sanity, by the way, if anyone wants to read it, whether they believe in God or not,
Yeah.
because it starts out by saying that we should rejoice.
Yes.
And, he says, and I'm going to say it again, rejoice. And it goes on to say, let your gentleness be evident to all. The Lord is near. Don't be anxious about anything, he says, but
Mm,
in everything,
yeah.
through petition and prayer, which is meditation, with thanksgiving, which
Wow.
is
That's like
gratitude.
all of it right there.
Present your request to God. So with gratitude, to be open and asking with already a positive frame of mind, not like, oh, my glass is half empty, I'll never have anything. I mean, you and I live in the first world. So frankly, any problem we have is likely a first world
I
problem
know.
relative to what other people are dealing with.
Yeah.
So to be grateful for that, like,
Yeah.
okay, I have a soft bed at night. I have a car that works. I have, medical care. I have oxygen that is cleaner. My water doesn't have poisons in it. Hopefully not, um, being grateful and being in a place of curious receptivity and growth. When we come to whatever we perceive God to be in that way, the universe will answer and respond
Yeah.
with opportunity and understanding. And we're made to grow. We are totally made to evolve and grow in
Yeah.
this life and probably in whatever the next is. I can't wait.
I know.
Yeah,
Barbara, this has been so great. So we talked about all aspects of neurodiversity as it relates to addiction and mental health. And just to kind of summarize or reiterate, with someone who is neurodiverse, there can come a certain amount of co-occurring disorders or mental health issues. But the point is that the neurodiversity is more of a neurological thing. So a lot of times there could be neurological roots to our mental health challenges, and so it's really worth looking into that. And what I'm wondering from you is, I want people to hear about your work and how they can connect with you, and also how you think we can fix this, like get the word out, and like what do we do to change mental health, because man, we are in a crisis, and it's true,
yeah.
you know?
Well, I think you're right. I think each of us have a responsibility to first of all get educated about our own situations, and
Yeah.
do a deeper dive into your family of origin, what was going on, why, begin to consider neurodiversity in the people in yourself, in your marriage,
Oh,
and
I
just
have to
being open to
interject and
that.
say, do a genogram. I did so many when I was getting my practicum. I was the genogram
Yes,
girl. So, and
I
those
love
can
it.
be very helpful. And if you need help with a genogram, just see me. I even have the whole Gene Pro thing. So anyway, moving on, but those can be very
Yeah,
helpful as
that's
well.
true. It's what's happening upstream of you
Yeah, yeah,
genetically, and so if you're willing to look and even to tell somebody, hey, I'm looking into this. What do you know? So
yeah,
I actually, especially the women I work with, because women are so relational and they love to talk about things, right? And I tell every woman and every person that wants to ask somebody else that you know if neurodiversity is in their life. Do they know anybody? And just see what they say. And if they say, what's that? And you can describe it, they go, oh my gosh, now that you mentioned that, I think my cousin is, or I think my son is, or I'm hearing
yeah,
my grandson is being diagnosed. And it's a thread that you can say, okay, do you know anything about that? And there are more people that are beginning to wonder and learn than you would realize. So when you start being willing to learn yourself and talk about it to anybody at the
yeah.
office, at church, your next door neighbor, it's not a four-letter word to
Right.
be autistic. It's not. Younger people, it's all, Instagram is happening. There's a lot on TikTok about this. It's kind of
Yeah.
cool to be a nerd and neurodiverse. It's very fashionable actually in a certain generation.
Right.
It is.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's not a blacklist anymore. And then you can begin to share resources, hear about things, and you can begin to have dialogues. I have women go into their pastors with articles that I've written, with that Dr. Holmes has written, with this book. Get this book. It's on
Yes.
my website for how you can pre-order it. And
Uniquely us, right?
Uniquely us. You can pre-order it on Barnes and Nobles.
Okay.
I think maybe Amazon. There's a link on my website again.
And there's also going to be a link. There's a link in the description to this podcast as well.
Excellent. So yeah, and we have to do this from a grassroots level up. It's not going to be waiting for the government or some academic university or international law to dictate our knowledge about this. It's a one by one discovery, and I think it's happening, Jody. It's happening. Just the fact that you and I are having this conversation, all the people listening to this, wherever and whenever they are now going to be like, oh, wow, I had never thought about that before. Thank you so much for the service that you're providing.
Yeah. And we never did discuss sort of the gifts of all this, but I will say anybody that is neurodivergent or has neurodiversity, you are very creative, interesting. Like our minds are brilliant, just different.
Yes.
Just different.
Yes. Out of the box, unique, essential. Come on, Isaac Newton, Galileo, all the people who have pushed us forward culturally.
Einstein. Einstein was dyslexic. That's what I always tell people. I'm like, Einstein was dyslexic. So I keep waiting to invent something like that. You look at all this stuff and you're like, why didn't I think of that? That seems so obvious, like the peanut butter flavored Snickers or something, like all the stuff we have that we didn't have. You're like, why didn't I think of that? It just seems so obvious. But anyway, okay. So
you're doing this podcast. This is amazing.
I know. Now I just gotta get the word out more. It's hard. I've been in radio for 30 plus years, and you kind of have this built-in audience. With the podcast, you don't. So it's a whole different sort of ball game trying to get the numbers and all that stuff. But anyway, so Barbara, I love this conversation. Gosh, I could talk to you for hours. Thank you so much for sharing. You've been super helpful and insightful. Well, first of all, let people know how they can get in touch with you.
Okay. If they Google Barbara Grant, autism coach, they're going to find me. But my website is going to be there. It's bg-hc.com. That's short for Barbara Grant-Hope for Couples. So bg-hc.com.
Connect.
Free 20 minutes for anybody who wants it.
Yeah, free 20 minutes, and she'll definitely, send you in the right direction. And I think that's helpful. We need a starting place, So, awesome. Any parting words, Barbara? Anything that I know I sent you this great outline that we usually never follow, but anything that I'm sure we've missed so much.
Because your show is based on, on recovery and addiction.
Yeah.
I do think that there is so much hope, not just to stop your substance abuse, but to reform your neuroprofile in a neuroplastic way, to not just be a dry alcoholic, but a truly recovered and healed person who is growing in the way that you were meant to grow, healing, balancing, relating, understanding, and a light to others. Yeah. So look for that complete healing, take it to a neurological level. You will find help if you look for it.
Absolutely. Awesome. Barbara Grant, thank you so much for joining us.
God bless you, Jody.
Thank you so much, friends, for listening to Genuine Life Recovery, playing on your favorite app or on my website at jodystevens.org. It's JODIESTEVENS, jodystevens.org. There you can check out my podcast, blog, recovery coaching info, speaking, and more. Check it out.